Hello, everybody. This is Aidan Murphy, and welcome to my persuasive speech about guns in the United States. So, although the foundations of America are built upon the idea of freedom, I feel as though the idea is taken far too literally when it comes to the rights surrounding firearms. In the country, guns are a source of mass controversy and debate due to the amounts of deaths that we have in the United States from guns, which, believe it or not, amounts to over 15,000 per year. Think about that, 15,000 gun-related deaths every single year in the United States. This is partially due to the fact that guns are rooted into the country. They're kind of one of the foundations of the country, similar to stereotypical country music and the idea of manifest destiny. But due to the mass violence that firearms are associated with, I really think that eliminating guns as a whole would be a healthy step for the United States to take. But since that's a little bit unrealistic, that maybe putting restrictions on fully automatic weapons and attachments will make it a lot harder for people to mow down entire groups of people, and will be really a healthy step in the right direction for the country. So to kind of get a better idea about why these changes need to occur, I think it's really important to take a step back in history and really think about what led us to this moment. So to start, I'd like to talk about Columbine, which, as we all know, is one of the first shootings that really put school shootings or mass shootings on the map. This tragedy occurred in 1999 by two students, seniors at the high school, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, and together they killed 12 other students, and they killed a teacher until inevitably taking their own lives in the school. The students used two shotguns, and they actually filled the parking lot and parts of the school with bombs as well, which luckily didn't do as much damage as the shotguns they were carrying. But again, that's the reason why we're having this conversation. And this shooting was so bad and so monumental towards school shootings that saying Columbine in general is just kind of a word that means school shooting. That's how important this moment was in American history. But in the wake of Columbine, thankfully, we had policies introduced that helped make schools safer in general. We have better response times to these tragedies now, thanks to Columbine, similar to 9/11, where once an incident occurs, we're better prepared for it in the future. We're more preventative as well. We have lots of security cameras and security in general in schools now due to this incident. But unfortunately, that didn't stop everything, as we still had tragedies such as Sandy Hook, which occurred in 2012, where a 20-year-old named Adam Lanza killed 20 children ages 6 to 7 and 6 adult staff. So he actually killed his mom, and then he just drove 3 miles to a nearby school where he committed those atrocities. He used assault rifles and was able to just eliminate entire classrooms full of children. The entire affair only lasted 11 minutes from the minute he entered the door, gunning down, I believe, the vice principal and the principal and a couple other people, walking into classrooms and taking out teachers and students alike. In 11 minutes, he did it all, and then ended himself afterwards. Unfortunately, this incident, obviously, it made major headlines, and this was a huge area of discussion where we really, as citizens of America, took a step back to kind of reanalyze our gun policies and rethink everything. During this time, Obama, who was the president at the time, was quoted saying, "We're going to have to come together and take meaningful action to prevent more tragedies like this, regardless of the politics." So this was really a time where bipartisanly people were coming together to try to figure out why this happened and how we can prevent this happening in the future. So Sandy Hook as a whole was a huge wave of support for more strict gun laws. Actually, we're still seeing effects from Sandy Hook occur in recent months. Actually, on March 14th this year, 2019, the Supreme Court allowed for the parents of the children of Sandy Hook to sue Remington, who is the company that made the AR-15s. Another shooting in recent history was the Las Vegas shooting, committed by Stephen Paddock. He killed 58 people, as we can probably all remember. This is very recent news. Wounding 422 from a hotel room, shooting down into a concert. And while he only killed 58 and wounded 422, the panic caused by this incident ended up resulting in 851 people being wounded. In order to commit these heinous acts, he modified over a dozen semi-automatic guns, legally modified actually, to make them become automatic. And this was recorded as the worst gun massacre in modern American history. These are a lot of really pivotal points for the United States in terms of changing the way we do things in order to make it more difficult for people to mow down large groups of people. This isn't even including recent shootings such as the Orlando nightclub massacre, Virginia Tech, and several other shootings that have occurred in churches in the United States, unfortunately, in recent years. So here's some statistics regarding the United States and gun ownership. So, in fact, the United States has the highest amount of gun ownership compared to every other country in the world. With that, we also have the highest amount of gun-related deaths. So, unfortunately, we have one and the other. And in the United States, as a result of this high level of gun ownership, homicide rates are 7 times higher as a whole. So just homicides in general. But gun homicide rates are 25 times higher, which is insane to think about. You would think that for being a country that has so many guns, we would know how to properly use them and we'd be able to prevent people from acquiring them when they're unfit to have them in the first place. Unfortunately, also firearm suicide rate is 8 times higher than most other first world countries. Unintentional firearm deaths is 6 times higher. There was a video that was released a few years ago of a 11-year-old boy at a gun show who was using an Uzi with a stock. So the stock rested against his chest, and he was holding that Uzi, which is a fully automatic weapon. He pulled the trigger, and the stock kept in place, and the gun's recoil went straight up. And unfortunately, the recoil brought the gun while it was still firing just up and up and up until the barrel of the gun was resting under his chin. And he didn't stop pulling the trigger, unfortunately. So that was a tragedy that I remember recent years due to just bad parenting. Why would you allow your kid to shoot this fully automatic weapon? Why is it legal for an 11-year-old boy to be doing things like this? It resulted in his death, unfortunately, but it seems as though as a country we haven't really learned from our mistakes quite yet. Some of the changes that I'm proposing are just eliminating assault rifles in general. There's really no need to have them. They're unnecessary and dangerous, as I just pointed out with he was 8 years old, the child who shot himself with the Uzi and took his own life by accident. He was 8 years old. It's just really unnecessary for these fully automatic weapons to be owned. We don't live in an area in the world where our livelihood is threatened by dangerous beasts on a daily basis. We don't have to hunt for food. We can drive to the grocery store down the street. And I do understand that people like to recreationally hunt, but that is no reason to have a weapon of mass destruction, such as an AR-15 or just any of these guns that are able to pump out bullets at just an insane rate like this. But since that's a little bit of an unrealistic proposal, in this country at least, we could make it harder to acquire certain attachments for guns, such as bump stock bans, which actually 11 states have already done. Bump stocks reduce recoil for guns, so it will be harder for people to just hold down the trigger and just go to town. So bump stocks have already been banned in 11 states. We could restrict magazine sizes. That is already been done in 8 states, but still we could do better. And in general, we could just make it harder to acquire guns in the first place. We could issue background checks that check people's criminal records, make sure that people with mental illnesses aren't acquiring guns. CNN actually had a 13-year-old actor go around town and see if he could do things like buy beer, cigarettes, lottery tickets. All of the cashiers at all of those places just kind of laughed at him and told him, go home, kid. You're 13 years old. You can't buy cigarettes. You can't buy booze. You can't buy scratch tickets. Scratch tickets are super dangerous, as we all know. But the kid was able to walk into a local gun show and within 15 minutes or so leave with a gun that he purchased legally from a gun show. So we need to really be making it so that there are thorough checks that are going through at these gun shows so that no one's able to just walk in and leave with a gun, such as just a random 13-year-old without any identification or anything. It's just completely unreasonable. And for people thinking that changes like this really don't work, I'm going to point to Australia as an example of how they do. So in 1996, Australia had a very bad shooting at a cafe in Tasmania where over 30 people were killed. And this was in 1997 after the wake of that shooting and in the wake of a different shooting that happened somewhere in Europe. They decided to ban pretty much or almost all semi-automatic weapons and pump-action shotguns. And in doing so, they bought the guns back from the people who owned them. So they were reimbursing them for their loss. And this equated to about 660,000 guns. So they were able to buy these guns back, and gun deaths per capita in Australia since then are 10 times lower proportionately than they are than in the United States. So apparently these changes seem to have worked. If we're able to save lives by making changes such as these, I don't see why there's any excuse to not be doing so. So in the end, trying to eliminate guns as a whole might be a little bit of an unrealistic goal, but limiting their use and their availability is a really good start to massively decreasing gun violence and, in return, decreasing the amount of people who die at the hands of these war machines. Thank you for watching. This has been Aiden Murphy.